Well, thank you for coming out. Thank you for your hospitality. This is my second time here. It's a beautiful, beautiful town. I was telling someone earlier, it's very photogenic. I mean, looked great on film. Show of hands, who's here because you love or you have an interest in film? One person. A few people. Okay, a few people. Who's here because of your love for Hartsville? Okay. Darlington County. You could be multiple of these. Major Coker's legacy, his life, his name, business, education, and culture. Excellent. Who's here just for lunch? Free lunch. Okay. Oh. Well, it was over a lunch that Will and I met in Raleigh through a mutual friend. This was in November of 22. It's been a bit. And it was not until February of 23 that we came down here, my first time, as a, kind of an exploration, and for me, an inspiration to see the sites, the locations. We visited a number of places to walk around prior to embarking and writing the script, the screen adaptation. My son, who was also a filmmaker in his own right, and I came that time and walked around, as was referenced before, and we asked some people about Major Coker and why the university was called Coker University, etc., including even someone at the hotel that we had a presentation in the Coker room of, I think it was the Hampton Inn or something like that. And the receptionist didn't even know who Coker was, and there's a room named after him.
Okay, can you talk a little louder?
Absolutely. And so this is a problem. And to quote, you know, the I guess it was Apollo 13 astronaut, Hartsville, we have a problem. And people are disconnected from history. Young people in particular are disconnected from our heritage, their own history, our nation's history, true history. And this is a problem. Alluded up there, those who won't remember the pastor are bound to repeat it, Santayana said. And so we can do something about that. In film, these what-if stories are always fascinating to me. They kind of be like a cautionary tale. What if Major Coker had never existed, never lived? What if he had never done what he did? I'm reminded every Christmas, millions of households watch It's a Wonderful Life. Maybe some of you all. And it's the story of, as you know, George Bailey. Excuse me. You know, it's a very inspirational story. It's a what-if story. And Bedford Falls would have turned into Pottersville, as you know. And that was not a good place to live. Had he taken his own life, had he not had an impact in Bedford Falls. Now, that's a fictional story. Well, James Coker's life is a real-life story, and Hartsville is what it is because, in great proportions, because of Major Coker, as we all know. He had a lasting and real-life impact in this town, and also in the county and in the state, and actually in the world. Just take Coker University, 1,200 students every year, 30 majors, 25 minors, over so many years. Sunoco, 22,000 employees worldwide in 30 countries, products in maybe 90 countries. So a tremendous impact. You know, I actually personally don't know anybody who started a business that's now in 30 countries. Or reaching 85 countries or 90 or whatever the number is. So he's had a tremendous impact. And the world, I agree, needs to know about this man's story. It's a fascinating, extraordinary, and inspiring story. So when Will and I met, we discussed this, and I told him from the get-go, I don't know that I'm the right person to write a story. My name is Joaquin Fernandez, right? I'm not from the South. I'm from the South, but down south. My father was from Spain. My mother was from the Dominican Republic. I grew up in the Dominican Republic. Now, English was sort of my first language because I was born in Miami, Florida. And the first 6 years of my life I lived down there. But first grade through college was in the Dominican Republic in Spanish. But sometimes it takes an outsider, and I'm not pretending to be an expert in anything at all. But sometimes an outside view is refreshing, can be refreshing. But I told him, I said, I don't know that I'm the right person to write something that has to do with the Civil War. I mean, I didn't study that. But if I can find something, because I wouldn't be passionate, but I can't sell something that I don't believe in or that I don't know enough about. So I told them, but if there's some sort of modern day narrative that I can kind of tell that story through, then maybe. And so anyway, long story short, here we are. And the script is complete. And we're going to go into that in a moment. But, you know, films are very powerful. It's a very powerful medium for change. It could be societal, personal. And I truly believe that. I think that this town and this county, there's some scenes in Charleston as well, and the state can be shown to the world in a new, fresh way through this story. But most importantly, this life, this legacy of this extraordinary person can inspire young generations that are coming after even the current young generation. We want to inspire the next generation to understand the importance of and consider the lessons of history. Like I mentioned before, Santayana said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. We know that quote. The second part of that quote is less known. It says activity. Listen to these words. Activity does not consist in velocity of change, but in constancy of purpose. I'm going to read the whole quote now. Those who cannot remember the past, so many of our people, are condemned to repeat it. Activity does not consist in velocity of change. Being busy, the digital generation, you don't even have to be young to be a victim of this. Things moving so fast in society. It's crazy. It's exponential. AI, let's not even go there. But in constancy of purpose. And so I think Major Coker's life is a perfect realization of that. So our film will indeed tell the life, the success, and the legacy of Major Coker's life, but we will do so by engaging younger audiences through a modern narrative that sets up and provides a canvas, as it were, for that historical narrative. Why?
Okay.
Yes.
Why don't you just move the podium up several feet toward us, and then we can hear better?
Sure.
Since you're not tied to the laptop like I was. Come on up.
Sure. Well, this is good.
Pardon me. Go ahead.
No, absolutely. I think I feel like I'm shouting, but maybe I'm not.
We're old.
Okay. We all have gray hair here. Most of us do. What? So why do this? Why tell this important story, a historical story, through a modern day narrative? Because it would be very hard to pitch the following film. This sounds great, but it's kind of a hard pitch. The film recounts the life of Major James Lloyd Coker, a multifaceted figure, businessman, merchant, industrialist, Christian philanthropist, and Civil War veteran. He founded Sunoco Products and Coker College, or Coker University, and earned the moniker the Major following his service in the Confederate Army. It's not an easy sell nowadays. So this is the log line. The log line is a term that we use in the film world for like a super short synopsis. And this is the concept, and then we'll go into it. We're not going to read the script today, obviously, but I'm just going to walk you through Acts 1, 2, and 3, kind of. But this is the log line. Amid the aftermath of George Floyd's death and the societal unrest of 2020, a diverse group of college friends, right here, is thrust into a journey of self-discovery as their protagonist, one of the students, struggles to produce a stage play about Civil War era entrepreneur Major James Coker, whose legacy touches all their lives. So we'll go into that now. But that is something that that story is relevant to today. And people can identify with different factors in that story. But it's a way, not a gimmick exactly, but it's a way to tell the historical narrative through the modern day narrative. And we'll see how. This, by the way, will have this film and the character, very strong characters, very well developed three-dimensional characters. Some of them are one strong character. It's not the main character, but one strong character is an African American male who works at Sunoco. Now, when I say these things, these are all fictional things in the modern day. It's all completely made up. So when I say he works at Sunoco, obviously he doesn't work at Sunoco, but so this character works at Sunoco. He's an African American. Is the half brother of this biracial female character who's a student there, sociology major, and with a minor in dance. And she is the girlfriend of our protagonist. Jacob is his name, who is half South Carolinian, half Jewish, or from his ancestry. So these are very strong characters. And then so the fourth character, his name is Juan, is Hispanic, and he is sort of like a comic relief character because he's also a theater student, but he does stand-up comedy on the side. And you can get away with all kinds of things through comedy. So comic relief on the one hand, but also pointed social commentary on the other, which you can get away with by making people laugh. So very well-rounded characters. So here's this kind of the synopsis of the modern day narrative. It would be very hard, say, reading the script, to tell you how the two narratives intertwine, but believe me, they do in a very cohesive way. So the narrative of the modern day story is, as I said, the Coker University theater major. It's kind of a play on the words. The major is also the theater major student. Jacob Solomon Pinckney is struggling to finish his one-man play about Coker, but it's 2020, and the COVID pandemic shuts down the school along with everything else. It becomes a problem for him to continue, and he wants to do this thing because he has dreams of going to Hollywood or whatever. Then on May 25th, a video of George Floyd's death goes viral, and BLM protests erupt all over the country. Painful reminders of America's complicated history of race relations are being torn down, statues, monuments, whatnot. And the very idea of celebrating the life of a Confederate major becomes quite troublesome. So Jacob's relationship, Jacob again is our character, main character, his relationship with his biracial girlfriend Candy and her brother Malcolm, it becomes really affected by this. So that's the problem that he has. He has a goal and he has a set of problems and antagonists, including, the pandemic. Now, this other character, Malcolm, he's also dealing with, these are subplots that are going through, and this is, now we're in Act 2. Malcolm is also dealing with his own dilemma because he is ascending the corporate ladder at Sunoco. And Sunoco obviously was founded by the same person that he is sort of trying to get his friend Jacob to let go, because he's very sympathetic, Malcolm is, to the BLM cause. And so he's like, what are you doing? Why are you writing a play and wanting to perform a play about some Confederate soldier? Are you nuts? But he's got his own dilemmas because he's going up the corporate ladder. Now, I mentioned Juan. He's kind of a fish out of the water stand-up comic, and he plays certain parts in the subplots here. And then Candy is dealing with her own issues with, issues of critical race theory that come up, and and as a biracial woman, she's like, well, my mom is black, my dad is white. Like, what am I supposed to be? Who am I? Who's the oppressor? Who's the oppressed? That kind of thing. Now, I'm touching on a lot of sort of controversial topics because that's what people are talking about, and this is what the world that we're living in right now. So Candy and Jacob, they during the COVID shutdowns anyway, they go to Charleston to visit her parents, this interracial couple, and they happen to be members of Mother Emanuel AME Church, which, if you all remember, now again, the movie is taking place in 2020. In 2015, this crazy kid, Dylan Roof, went into Mother Emanuel and shot a bunch of people, including the pastor. And but what's interesting about that historical fact in 2015, 5 years prior to our narrative, is that church, or most of the members of that church, famously on TV, forgave the murderer. And there was no violence in the streets in 2015. President Obama went down there, and it was very healing for that community. And that should have been a model for the rest of the country, but here in 2020, you have violence on the streets because of similar issues. So it's very important that couple brings some light into their own daughter, the boyfriend, our protagonist, etc. So, but Candy is still trying to make pressure from her brother Malcolm. And should she continue in the relationship with this guy? She is planning on doing a dance routine during his one-man show. Should she just quit? This kind of brings us into Act 3 because
Jacob is in a critical juncture. Should he abandon this seemingly cursed Coker project because everything is against? He tells somebody, it's like the CDC is against me. It's the WHO, the FBI, and then I think the GOD is against me now. And so, or he could revise it to reflect the shifting cultural landscape. That's an option. Or he could just confront this mounting group of critics and press on, jeopardizing perhaps things that he holds dear, including his relationship with his girlfriend, to whom he means to propose after the premiere of the play. So, but in the midst of this, he gets into a devastating car crash, breaks his leg, cracks his femur, much like Major Coker's femur was shattered, his alter ego, and ends up in a coma. So during his coma, there's other subplots are taking place. For example, Malcolm, he has a mentor, a VP at Sunoco, who is African American, think Morgan Freeman, and he sees what he's struggling with, but he's wiser, and he's like, hey, let's go for a walk over here. Let's go to the Hartsville Museum. And he shows him the exhibit there and the Coker, everything that he had been missing. And by the way, Jacob, our protagonist, works part-time, much like this gentleman right here, at the museum. And so that's part of the story. And so the mentor kind of helps him, hey, come to his senses and whatnot. But in the midst of Jacob's coma, the historical narrative, which has, and I'm going to bullet point them in a minute, but the historical narrative that has been going together with the modern day narrative kind of crashes into the modern day narrative because Major Coker visits Jacob in a dream. And I want to read that scene for you, just so you can get a taste. It's scene 80 of the first draft. This is the first draft of who knows how many drafts we'll have. That's how it happens in films. And so this is the dream sequence. And I'll read it to you. So you just get a taste of how we're approaching this. Oh, should have had a post-it note. So again, he's in a coma. We've seen him. Candy has visited him. Malcolm actually even visited him. And his heart has been softening toward his sort of antagonist. The light outside the room, this is at a hospital, appears to dim further, and an older gentleman enters the room, donned impeccably in a formal Confederate officer's uniform, but no face mask. This is during COVID. He stands silently on this side of the curtain. Although his face obscured by shadows, we can nevertheless tell he's observing Jacob, who's lying motionless on the bed. Assisted by an ornate walking cane, the man steps forward, and we now can see his face. It is Major James Lloyd Coker, and and this time he's 80 years old. And then he comes in limping slightly and says, "Jacob Solomon Pinckney." And I'm not an actor, but I'm going to try to do the voices differently so that you know who's talking here, because I'm not going to go Jacob, James. That gets tedious. So James says, "Jacob Solomon Pinckney, delighted to finally make your acquaintance. I've heard a lot about you, young man." James is Coker. James approaches Jacob, who is now sitting up in bed, wearing a puzzled expression. We as an audience were like, what? This must be a dream because he's in a coma. "Are you here to take me home?" asks Jacob. "And where would that be, Jacob?" He doesn't have an answer. James sits down and kindly changes the subject. "I knew several Pinckneys in my day. Prominent family. You have big shoes to fill, son." Jacob says, "All the shoes I've ever been given seem several sizes too big for me. I sure don't feel prominent. I sure don't feel prominent. Pinckneys must be rolling in their graves just about now, which is where I want to be." James continues to listen to Jacob with heartfelt compassion. Jacob continues, "I really wanted to tell your story, but here I am. Plus, too much has changed. My generation is ashamed of our history. They hate this country. What's the use? I mean, even God..." Jacob stops himself, inhaling deeply, as angry tears brim in his eyes. He leans back into his pillows, overcome with emotion. "You wouldn't understand. You're the great James Lloyd Coker, founder of 20 successful businesses, a man with an expansive heart and a keen intellect, a pace setter in women's education, a progressive in race relations, blah, blah, blah. You know what? I'm done. Jacob tries to calm down. I'm sorry, this is not how I wanted things to turn out. James sits up in his chair. Do you know what my favorite Bible passage is, young man? Jacob shrugs his shoulders and closes his eyes. Genesis 32. It's the night before Jacob is going to meet his brother Esau, who had pledged to kill him. Jacob sends his family away and is left alone. And the Bible says that a man came to him and wrestles with him but the man did not prevail against Jacob. So he touched the socket of his hip, and it was out of joint. But they continued wrestling all that night. Jacob opens his eyes. Then the man said to Jacob, "Let me go, for the day breaks." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Do you know the rest of the story? Jacob nods in silence. The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he said. And what did the man say? He said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed." The two of them share a moment of quiet reflection. Finally, James leans in. Let me share a story you might not have heard before. In March of 1865, as I made my way back to Hartsville after delivering a large supply of food to some Confederate troops in Richmond, I received word that the Union Army had penetrated the PD region. With caution, I continued my journey home, but nothing could have prepared me for the devastation that awaited me. Sherman and his troops had laid waste to our farm, leaving nothing in their wake. They seized our cotton bales, plundering everything of value from our home. Now remember, my left leg was permanently crippled, and I'll admit despair weighed heavily upon me. But let me tell you, son, failure, I'm shouting because I need to shout here, but that's not how it's going to play out. Failure was never an option for me. I persevered through a devastating injury, betrayed by a friend, relentless attacks by carpetbaggers, bankruptcy twice over, and even surviving the great earthquake of 1886. But most importantly, I weathered a crisis of faith that lasted over a decade. So believe me, I understand your struggles. And I assure you, you are far from finished. No, sir, you are just getting started. James leans back in his seat, lost in thought, as if traveling through time in his mind. 44 years later, in March of 1909, I had the distinct honor of meeting Mr. Booker T. Washington, who came through Charleston while on a speaking tour. He said something that I've never forgotten. The world is looking for men, he said, who can tell us how difficulties are surmounted and obstacles removed. But the world has little patience with men who run against a snag, get discouraged, and then simply give excuses instead of results. The elder James is now standing tall, leaning on his cane. He picks up Jacob's book. Jacob was reading a book while his girlfriend was reading a book while he was in a coma. Booker T. Washington's book. And holds it up to him. He said, there is as much dignity in tilling a field as in writing a poem. I tilled my field, Jacob. Now it's your turn to provide the poetry. James turns and walks out of the room without even a hint of a limp. The camera slowly pans around the room to reveal Jacob lying motionless in the cold hospital bed, still trapped in his unyielding coma. So that's kind of the well, obviously that's just one scene, but that's kind of how the two narratives kind of clash into one. And then Jacob wakes up from his coma and decides, I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to finish it, and obviously it's a happy ending kind of movie. He finishes the play and performs it. Now, how the historical narrative types, I'm just going to mention bullet points. Major Coker's childhood. So, however this movie gets done, it's going to have several actors and an actor who can play a young man, let's say in his late teens or early 20s, and a man in his 80s. It's been done before. But we will see his childhood and youth, his friendship with York, as Will mentioned, his brother Charles. There's a dynamic in there, the family dynamics. There's a scene where he goes to the slave market, although we don't see that, in a graphic. But they talk about abolitionism, him and his sister. Then his time at the Citadel, his conversion there, a trial that he had there, and he actually, it is said that he threatened or challenged his professor to a duel. Then his Harvard time in Harvard, and how he took some soil, some dirt from Darlington County there to be tested in the labs there. Then 2 weddings in Alabama. He went to his cousin's wedding, and that's where he met Sue, his wife, and married in Alabama. The time at war, his injury, his near-death experience, and York leaving him. His return to Hartsville, Sherman's devastation, and Reconstruction, politics, etc. Business, education, all these exploits, and then finally with York's return, who he returned 50 years later. And so
That's
all
actual, by the way.
yeah, that's a true story.
Yeah.
And so a few things that I want to mention is that many facts of Major Coker's life will also be talked about and shown in the modern day narrative through the rehearsal of the play, the museum, etc., conversations. And the historical narrative that I've kind of just described is kind of like, imagine in a movie a flashback. It's not quite a flashback, but it's kind of like a flashback. A series of flashbacks. It's a narrative that goes, and it's kind of a film within a film. And the movie actually ends with a little epilogue after the performance and all that. You know, fade out, fade back in. He's walking out of maybe the church over here on a Sunday morning, and walks in front. He's now walking with Candy. Candy is pregnant, so evidently they got married and they're expecting their first child. And he's limping a little bit still. And they walk in front of his old job here at the Hartsville Museum. And then as they keep walking, this theater over here has been, remodeled and it's open. And they're showing, they come up to a poster, and the poster is The Major, which is a fictional film about Major Coker, which is the film within the film that we kind of just watched. So it's a little trick there. So I want to say this is not, in my mind, this is not a faith-based project. It's not a Christian movie. I'm a Christian, but it's not a Christian movie. It's not a heavy evangelist and, where's the gospel there? It's not that. It's the life of a man, and it's an inspiring story that has modern-day relevance. It does not take sides, north, south. I don't have a dog in that race. And people are not, this is not an apologetic for this or an argument for that. It's not. It does deal with controversial issues, but in a very respectful way, in a provocative way.
It does present his faith, though.
Absolutely, that's there, but it's not a gospel track. It's not a Christian film to get people to receive Jesus. Not in my mind. That's for the church, and that's for individuals to do in their lives. And there are Christian films that do that too, but that's how I see this project. Although I am a Christian and I go to church every Sunday. So, but it's not a controversial film about, okay, this is pro-South or nothing like that, or anti-North either. What's next for this project? This is just a script. Right now it's a script and an interest meeting. Now we've had meetings with producers and whatnot. But what we want is to have a theatrical release eventually. Major distribution deal. I don't know who's familiar with Angel Studios. Angel Studios is very successful in the film industry, and they have a really interesting way of fundraising and marketing their films. They have one of I think the third most successful film last year, Sound of Freedom, which beat like Mission Impossible 4 or 5 or whatever number it is now, Tom Cruise. So a great model, and we have some connections there. It will be streaming on Netflix or Amazon or Hulu or whatever eventually, DVD, Blu-ray, whoever buys those still. But there's other collaterals, things like books. Well, there is the book here, a new edition, a children's book, coloring books, or a documentary about Major Coker, etc. Study guides. Perhaps even the movie within the movie will one day, if this is a successful film, hey, let's make a whole movie about that too. And let it stand alone like, say, The Patriot or something like that. So we're envisioning it as a $4 to $6 million movie, which is cheap in Hollywood or in the film industry, not in Hollywood, but in the film industry and the independent movie making world.
But it will be a full feature movie.
Yes. And one thing that's, what we're looking for is, yes, investors who are interested in doing something, being involved in the film industry or doing something because of Hartsville or your love for the county or the state or whatnot. There are a lot of in-kind services that people can donate. It's like, hey, I have trucks or I have a catering company, So those are costs that are not that don't have to be on the budget. donations too. There's a lot of seed money to do anything. And so one of the ideas that Will and I have discussed is doing what is called a torch. A torch is just a very particular term that Angel Studios does because their logo has the Statue of Liberty torch. But it's kind of like a short film or some scenes of a film, not quite a trailer. They don't accept trailers, but there's a longer, something 10, 15 minutes that shows, okay, this is what this, it's kind of like a pilot, but a 10 or 15-minute pilot, let's say, shows what this movie can be. And, you know, maybe not what it's going to be because it doesn't have, you know, all of the millions of dollars that it takes to make a great looking film, but still gives you a really good sense. So that's something where donations can come in, because we could do that, and that could be on a GoFundMe page, and certainly to speak to movie studios and whatnot. So that's kind of like where we want to go. I want to thank you for your time. I probably went over. And do you have any questions for me? I have copies of what we call a treatment. A treatment is kind of like a longer synopsis, and it's a few pages. I have a few of those if you want to take them. But if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them, anything at all, or comments, and then I'll pass it to